Hello, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, and wherever you are listening to this LinkedIn Live show. Look, I've got a really nice special guest. He was on my Global Sales Leader podcast, and he was so good and he got so much traction. I invited him back again, and a really good thing, he's actually got a new book that we're going to discuss. Is the Influence Secrets to Success and Happiness. But we're talking it into a context of sales because Brian's also in an expert as sales within influence. He's a Cialdini master trainer. He's exceptional at what he does. He's got about 30 plus years of experience working in insurance and that style of things. Like, I'm going to bring him up now and he can quickly introduce himself. So, hey, Brian, welcome.
Good to
How
see
are
you
you doing
again,
today?
Jason. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Look, there's obviously a bit of a celebration here because you have a wonderful new book that we're going to go into a little bit more detail in a few moments. But look, in context, I think influence and persuasion is one of the core factors within sales leadership, but also in business. Like, you have an eclectic history of sales influence and obviously the Cialdini influence and persuasion, and you're a trainer in that area, plus other facets of that. Quick introduction about yourself.
Well, I spent more than 30 years in the insurance industry. About 20 years ago, I stumbled onto Robert Cialdini's material and the light bulb came on. I was involved with sales training and I knew immediately what he is talking about. The psychology is the foundation of all selling. It's why some sales approaches work and why some don't. And I just became enamored with it and started to weave it into everything that I was doing, the sales training, sales coaching, working with leaders, the business coaching, all of it, because I saw that was so useful in helping to get people to take actions that weren't just good for me, but were good for them too. And 3 years ago, I stepped away from my corporate role, and this is what I do now full time through my company, Influence People.
Yeah, I find that's one of my favorite books of all time is the Chaldean Laws of Influence Persuasion, and it's just so true. It's I think it's the number one sales book that everyone should read, and like, you've mastered it, like you've got it down to a niche now. And I love the new book because it is a bit of a narrative story and how it works. So, like, we all know that stories make an impact and people remember it. So what was the ethos behind the story? How did you come up with the idea?
Well, the reason I came up with the idea was that there are certain books that people just won't pick up and read. So my first book, Influence People, was kind of a business/psychology book. My second book, Persuasive Selling, I mean, that's pretty direct in terms of sales. And there are
Yeah.
some people who just won't pick up those two books. But people do love stories. And I look out at the marketplace and I see the explosion of the business parable. So I thought, I wonder if I can teach influence through a story format. And that's what really got me going. And, one positive to COVID for me was having more time to be able to write. And so over the course of this year, I really put time and effort into this book. And it follows the life of a young man named John Andrews. Literally, you meet the guy when he's born through his career. And it's all about what he learns about influence from business coaches and mentors and clients, and how he sees the application for his professional, but also for his personal life. And so as far as I know, it's unique in that I don't know that anybody else has taken Cialdini's work and tried to distill it into a story format to help a wider audience of people learn about influence.
Well, I think it's so compelling because, especially coming from your life and how your life has actually gone through, and adding those core elements of likability, because people like themselves. But once you engage with someone that likes you, and the more likable that you can be, the more influence that you can actually give. But I think everything's got to be done on a positive sense,
Oh,
not a negative way. You've got to be likable, but you've got to be sort of charismatic with that.
absolutely. One of the stories in the book, the character John, when he steps out into the working world and he is spending time with various mentors, he meets a guy named Ben Blackstone. Now, Ben Blackstone is based on somebody that I know named Ben Blackman. And I worked with Ben for many years, and we've been friends that entire time and remain friends, even though we both left the insurance company.
Mm.
And so this character, Ben Blackstone, what he teaches John is it's not about getting people to like you. It's all about you coming to like the people that you're with and how they respond to that. And that's really eye-opening for John. And he learns it early in his career, which is great because then it becomes foundational to how he interacts with people throughout his lifetime. And almost every character in the book, Jason, is based on somebody like my friend Ben, who I learned valuable lessons from over the course of my life, and then to distill it into a story format to share with a wider audience. It's really cool for me to get to honor those people by sharing their stories with the wider audience.
Yeah, I saw that in the testimonials as well in the front of the book about how you incorporate that, because I think that's a clever way of doing it, especially distilling how influence and that works with people. So,
Mhm.
what are the benefits for reading this book? What can people expect, and what sort of outcomes can people learn from about your new book?
Well, I think we are all every day trying to influence people. I
Yeah,
mean, it can be as simple as, wanting your child to empty the dishwasher. It can be as complex as trying to close a multi-million dollar sales deal. It can be leading an organization. But every one of those, as you're interacting with people, you are trying to change their behavior, get them to do the things that as a parent, you need them to do, maybe as a sales leader, to get them to take certain actions that are also in their best self-interest.
yeah.
But we're trying to change behavior. And if we understand what the research says, and we're willing to step back and think about how we're communicating and how we might do it differently, I really believe that people can get to better results faster by relying on what the science says. And that's really what the book lays out, but in a story format. So hopefully people would read it and go, wow, that's really simple. I could do that. And that
Yeah.
they'll put that into practice and reap the benefits.
I think it is practice, regardless of everything else. Like if you're going to read the book and go flying through it and go, excellent, I've got it. But then you have to really apply it and make sure that you learn it and make sure that you use the language correctly and the linguistics correctly.
Mhm.
Because without that, I don't know. So where can people learn sort of more bite-sized chunks? I know you've done extremely well on LinkedIn Learning, haven't you? With some of the courses that you've done. And unofficially, I've done quite a few of your courses before we actually met. So I know how good they are. So what's a really good way of applying the learnings from the book or the books that you've done and the LinkedIn learnings that you've done? Because you can actually watch and read and do everything else, but unless you don't use it, you pretty much you lose it.
Yeah, I look at influence as a skill, which means it's more than just knowing something in your head. I mean, we can all learn things, but wisdom is putting them into practice. And I really
Yeah.
believe that because it's a skill, that means you can practice it, you can perfect it. And that's what people need to do. Just as I would encourage any salesperson, if you win or lose a sale, you need to step back and say, what did I do? What were the behaviors that led to the win? And how can I maybe replicate those or use those in other contexts to be successful? But if I lost, what did I perhaps do that really got in my own way from having success? How can I remove that or change that? So it's a continual learning process, but then you have to put it back into practice and assess, how am I doing with this? And that should be an encouragement to your listeners, because this is not something that we are inherently born with. We can learn
Mm.
it, we can practice it, and we can perfect it, which means we can all get better when it comes to our ability to influence people.
Look, the title of your book is Secrets to Success and Happiness. So, what's the correlation between the success and happiness? What are the two connections there? Because we all want success in our lives,
Mhm.
whether it's personal and professional, and I think there's a connection there.
Yeah.
But
Well,
how?
typically, like Jason, if I were in front of an audience and I would have the word yes up on the screen, huge, bold font, yes, and I would ask the question, how many of you would agree that much of your professional success and personal happiness depends on getting people to say yes. And every hand goes up every time because they intuitively know that when it comes to their professional life, whether they're a salesperson, a manager, a leader of an organization, they have to get other people to say yes to them so that they can move the initiatives of the company ahead. So everybody gets that one. But when they pause and think about going home and how much more peaceful and happy things are at home when you maybe communicate with your spouse or kids differently, so they more willingly do the things that you're needing them to do, that tends to reduce friction and elevate happiness. And so people start realizing, hey, this is a skill that 24/7, 365 is going to benefit me, whether I'm at home or whether I'm at the office.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally concur. But when you said friction there, rang a bell with Roger Dooley, who wrote a book called Friction as well, which is loosely based on the principles of what we're speaking about. I'm also interested that the success factors, because we're talking about the influence styles, but happiness and success, there's got to be a direct correlation because it's a feeling, isn't it? There's that age old, it's that connection of making people feel good about the relationship that you had or having with the other person, your client, or your personal relationships, or whatever it might be.
Well, I think when it comes to happiness, there are studies that show when we do things with other people, we tend to, if we're enjoying something, we enjoy it more. If we aren't enjoying something, then we enjoy it less. Being together with people is a magnifier of how we're feeling. And if we can get those people to do the things that we need them to do, again, just very simply, like, our kids doing their homework, as a parent, and we see them doing well in school, we're happier. They're probably happier as they get their better grades. At the office, it can be the same thing. Success quite often translates into happiness. I know that when I was working in my corporate role, when initiatives that we were doing succeeded, I felt good about that, but I also felt happy too. So I think you're very right that there's a very direct correlation to, we tend to be happier when we're successful.
Yeah, I'm also quite fascinated. How did you fit in the 6 or 7 bits of influence within the book? Because I read, I haven't, honestly enough, I read up to half of it, but I was interested in how you connected unity and reciprocation within there and social proof, because that's all really good elements in there. Like, I teach a little bit of this in some of the sales stuff that I teach, but I'm amazed that not that many people know about it in the way that you know about it, and myself.
Well, anything until you know it is really, in a sense, a secret. And that's why I talk about secrets to success and happiness. Yeah. It's not that it's hidden under a rock, but it's something that people could be so busy that they don't stop to think about it, or they've never spent time learning. When it comes to some of the principles, an example like unity. Unity is the principle that says it's easier for us to say yes to those who we consider of us, that we are unitized with, of our tribe. It could be of our faith, or my father was in the Marines. There's a deep bond. It goes beyond mere friendship. There is a deep sense of oneness with that principle. In the book, what's really cool is I have a friend named Al. And the first time I met Al, if I go back more than 30 years, I had just started with the insurance company that I used to work for. It was sometime in the summer, and I had seen this guy's work, and I really questioned it. I'm like, what's he thinking here? My first conversation with him, Jason, was, he tells me, hey, if you've looked at some of my work and you've got questions, it's for good reason. I just want you to know I just got out of a 6-week alcohol rehab program, and I'm trying to get my life straight. And he was so brutally honest that you couldn't help but love the guy and feel a connection with him. And the wonderful thing is, he never drank again. He told me something years ago that was so interesting. We were driving to the insurance agency that he leads, and he said, hey, that guy you were bowling with last night, he's also a recovering alcoholic. And I had no idea. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, I really like to hire recovering alcoholics if I can, because I tell them, if you can beat the disease, selling insurance is going to be easy. And that exemplifies the principle of unity. that there is something, when an alcoholic helps another alcoholic, in a sense, they're helping themselves.
Hmm.
And if another alcoholic reaches out to help someone else, in a real sense, they're helping themselves. And so that's part of the unity. And what I did with that understanding was I took it into the book. And in the book, the lead character, John, meets an individual named Al Harris, who runs a small medical facility. And over lunch, John makes a comment to Al, and he says, I've visited a lot of different medical practices, but yours is different. I mean, it really seems like a family practice. And that's where
Hmm.
Al says, well, I'm going to tell you something. I am a recovering alcoholic. And then he talks about hiring recovering alcoholics. And it really brings to life the principle of unity for John, which he had been exposed to in a class in college, but now it drops from his head to his heart. And the book is full of stories like that, where these people that I really learned things from, I was able to craft it into the story as you follow the journey of this guy, John, and help readers to hopefully drop from their head to their heart and go, no, now I get it.
Yeah, there's elements in there of showing a little bit of vulnerability there, because that
Mhm.
also helps with that connection. And again, people like themselves, but they also like people that they can connect with. And I think that connection is absolutely it. If you're talking about unity, I think the connectability with that between one person and another, but also with a brand, with a person,
Mhm.
it's connectability, likability, and trust, which is absolutely compelling. And obviously, consistency with what you say all the time. Like I've seen a lot of your daily, almost seems like a daily newsletter. You're absolutely consistent with that. And I get that all the time from yourself, which is incredibly good. But what I really like what you've done, Brian, is I love your screen behind you. And for me, you're one of the only people that's ever done that. And that really gets that likability and that trust and that connection with yourself. And it also builds up that likability as well. And like we've been chatting on off and on ever since last year, anyway, via LinkedIn. And I think that's that also likability. But you've also shown a lot of authority in what you do, which is also compelling within the narrative and the storyline that you've done in the book as well.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad that that stands out, and I have been blessed that very early in life, when it comes to my personal consistency, I learned that through athletics. I learned early on that consistent effort over a long period of time pays dividends. And so when I set up this video studio, whenever I do sales calls with prospective clients, I always have their name and their logo up on the big screen, just to give them a little bit of a wow. And they feel
Yeah.
good about it. I feel good about it. We end up having a great conversation. But what I figured out very quickly was, anytime I get on Zoom, even if it's with a recurring client, I make sure that I have their name and their logo there, because I want to stay in that habit. And the
Yeah.
more that I do that, the easier it is. And it was the same with the blogging and the LinkedIn newsletter. I've been doing that now for almost 14 years. And with the exception of, I think, 3 weeks when my wife and I were in Scotland and Ireland for our 30th anniversary, I've published an article every single week for almost 14 years. But again, I'm blessed. I go back to that athletic training, and it's very easy for me to lay out a plan and then stick to it.
That's one thing that we have. One of the many things that we have in common is I used to be massive into athletics as a kid, and that could step me in good stead for the future. And I'm still running today. Now I'm running up and down the mountains, which is incredible. I've got Joran Stone actually. He's based in New York, but he's an Englishman. Actually, put in there, if you can break the addiction, they can sell insurance. Like if you can break that, absolutely.
Yep.
I'm sure any sort of addiction that you have, if you
Yeah.
can break that, you can probably internalize things and understand how your brain works, so
Right.
you can verbalize it and sort of connect with other people. So let's have a look at the other facets that you have. Like I understand your psychology of persuasion and engineering behind that. And is it 3 books that you produce now?
Yeah. So my first book was Influence People, with the subtitle Powerful Everyday Opportunities to Persuade That Are Lasting and Ethical. And that was the business/psychology book that introduces readers to the psychology of persuasion, looks at decision making, looks at business application, business case studies, use in social media. The second book was Persuasive Selling for Relationship-Driven Insurance
Yeah.
Agents. And that one is very specific to a market. It supports a one-day workshop that I do. But I would tell your listeners that anybody in sales would benefit from it because, again, it looks at the psychology of persuasion, how to apply it to different buying styles. What does it take to become listening stars? What are the steps in the sales cycle? What's the best psychology throughout that sales cycle? It's just that the examples I use are supported by my time within the insurance industry. So those were the first two. And then obviously the third book that we've been talking about is The Influencer: Secrets to Success and Happiness.
Yeah, and I've downloaded a few of your workshops as well and I found them extremely interesting. How the different communication styles, and I've applied that to what I do. Is sometimes you have to look at some of the most successful people out there doing it really well, and you go, well, I have to apply that and learn from it, and how can I teach that? And that's how mastery is actually worked. Just one last thing. If you were interviewing yourself, Brian, what would you ask yourself? What sort of questions would you ask?
I wouldn't ask I know what I wouldn't say, why didn't you start doing this earlier? I've had people ask me that question. I was thinking about that the other day as I was walking. I go outside every morning and I walk and pray. And I just was saying, you know what, Lord, thank you that I started when I did, that if I would have waited any longer, I think I would have been fearful in the middle of COVID to try to start this business. I think if I had started much earlier, there were still too many things to learn. I just felt like when I left and started this, it was the perfect time. So I don't question that. I'm one of those people, Jason, who doesn't have a lot of regrets in life. There are very few things I think that I look back on and question why I did or did not do something. But if I look back, I do wonder at times what would my life have been like if I'd followed my father's path and maybe gone into the Marines, because that was the most pivotal moment of his life, was to go in there. And I think about that a lot. So there are the wonderments, but I don't regret at all the path I've been on. I have an awesome life, a wonderful family. My business is thriving. I'm very blessed in many, many ways.
I think the answer to the question is it happens at the right time. If you start looking back and start regretting it, then things are there to happen for a reason. So I think that's a really good thing to look at. Look, you've been awesome, and thank you so much for your time today. Always a pleasure to speak with you, Brian, and I'm sure we'll carry on talking. With the name Brian Ahearn, you're from Cork, your family heritage from Cork. So I know at some point you'll be back in Ireland, and we'll catch up for a pint of the Guinness at some point.
Well, you know what? Knowing that I was going to be on the show today during my morning walk and prayer time, I was just contemplating it. I hope when we move away from the state that we're in into something that's more normal, and that you and I, wherever it is in the world, that we will get an opportunity to meet and share some whiskey and a few pints.
Yeah. Excellent. Have a great day, Brian. I shall speak
Thanks,
to you
Jason.
soon.
Bye-bye.